I'm Andrew Harvey, and I'm in this amazing church which I've been in many, many times because of the grace of my beloved friend, Marj Britt, Dr. Marj Britt. We're in the Unity Church of Tustin, and for 19 years, Marj was the leader of this church and made of this church one of the most vibrant, buoyant, electric, mystical centers of America. Marj had the wit and the passion and the generosity to invite to this church most of the major cutting-edge teachers of the time. And I came here 5 or 6 times to really share whatever I was discovering. And I found in you, Marj, a complete companion of the soul, someone who really trusted me and so gave me the chance to give my very best. So for me to be able to interview you at this moment of your life when you've produced this absolutely wonderful and powerful and vibrant book, Your Soul's Invisible Codes, Unveiling Your Sacred Love Story, is a tremendous privilege, and I'm so grateful for many things. I'm grateful for your welcoming me back again and again here. I'm grateful for the wonderful congregation that you brought together and that is still alive with so much truth. And I'm grateful most of all for the long, sacred companionship that you and I have had, the many deep conversations in many different places all over the world, and the soul communion that we've had. There are very few people I've been able to talk about my own mystical journey to, and it's a tremendous joy to be able to share the deep secrets of the journey with someone who understands them. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. And I want to read something that really does express the vastness of the journey that you and I and everyone else is essentially on. And it comes from our great beloved Jalaluddin Rumi. Every form you see draws its origin from the unseen divine world. So if the form vanishes, what does it matter? Its origin was from the eternal. Do not grieve that every form you see, every mystical truth you hear will one day vanish. The fountain is always gushing water. Do not be afraid. The water is limitless. When you came into this world of created beings, a ladder was placed before you, so that you might climb out of it. At first you were inanimate, you then became a plant, after that you were transformed into an animal, at long last you transmuted into a human being, imbued with knowledge, intelligence, and faith. Next you will become an angel. And then you will have finished with this world, and your dwelling will be in the light world of heaven. Go beyond even that. Go beyond even the station of an angel. Pass into that vast ocean, so that the single drop, yourself, can in the end become the sea. There's nothing in mystical literature like that, because that amazing text of Rumi describes the endless journey that we are on. And one of the beautiful things about your book is that it truly plunges into the depths of that mystical, endless journey, but from a very deeply personal and deeply felt position of the heart. So I want to begin our conversation with asking you to give us some brief sense of this amazing journey that you've been on. Where were you born? How did it start? And how did it evolve?
You know, it's quite amazing when we really look into the distance and we can look back on our lives and see them in their fullness, in their glory, and in their joy, and in their sorrow, and see them in all of the arenas of manifestation and loss and life and death. And in a way, that's what is in that book, all of it. The plant that flowers, probably even a little bit of a playful animal.
Oh, yes.
and
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. And all of the dimensions of that. And so the book starts out in a moment of sorrow. And the experience that I have of not knowing in what direction to move, or even sometimes how to live. What I know is that for most people in their lives, they face those moments. They live
repeatedly. Yes.
And what I believe probably brought you and I together in such a beautiful and deep friendship over so many years, 17 years, I think we talked about, is that we sort of spanned those spectrums as we knew each other.
Yes.
We both, in different moments in time, were going through heartbreak.
Yes.
Or celebration.
Yes.
Or shifts and changes and wondering what was next. There was something about our relationship, however, that was vastly different. And it was that it was contained in a container of vastness.
Yes.
It had the ocean in it. And there was something in you and I that knew that ocean.
Yes.
And it was a total joy.
Yes.
To find someone we could talk about it with.
Absolutely. And someone who wouldn't say we were crazy, someone who wouldn't try and put us down, someone who wouldn't try and over-explain what we were going
Exactly.
through. Because it is a tremendous mystery, this journey. And only the ones who have been imbued with that mystery can really help each other as we've helped each other.
And the experience of being in a field that is, as Rumi said, beyond right and wrong.
Right.
A field that is beyond words.
Yes.
Even though you are so proficient with words, and in the process of my 19 years here, I learned a lot from you about being proficient with words, I think.
Oh, God, I don't think so. You've always had a great gift of words, as you do in this book. How did you come here? How did your ministry in Tustin start?
It's incredible for me how I see how so many moments of being catapulted in consciousness came out of shattering.
Yes.
And out of heartbreak.
Yes. Many deaths have to happen for us to be prepared to die into life, to die into love. Yes.
To die before you die.
Yes.
And I was born in Boulder, Colorado, as you mentioned, which is a beautiful, beautiful city against the mountain range and the Flatirons and the Rocky Mountains. And my family was all Seventh-day Adventist.
Good gracious.
A very fundamentalist Christian path. But there was a passion in that.
That's so true.
An absolute passion.
And a passion of devotion, which is actually seeded in you from your childhood.
Absolutely.
It might have had an eccentric beginning, but my God, so many different paths lack that passion, don't they?
And I went to Sabbath school as a tiny child. There's a picture in the book. When I was 15 months old, And my great Aunt Lida is standing in my grandmother's flower garden, and I'm playing on the ground with a kitten. So my animal started out as a playful kitten. And but also, there were the stallions
Yes.
that were in the barn that my grandpa used to go down to, and out on a ranch in northeastern Colorado. And so I grew up with that kind of awareness of nature and the landscape of the all that is.
Oh, yeah. And the glorious sky, that glorious sky of Colorado, the vastness in which everything manifests.
And a pioneering spirit.
Yes.
One of my favorite books in those years, those younger years in my life, high school years, where I was still in the private school system of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. I attended Campion Academy. My favorite classic book was Willa Cather.
She's my favorite American writer. I had no idea that we shared that. If Willa Cather had been a man, she would be the most important American writer. She is a perfect writer with such depth.
Oh, Pioneers,
Oh, Pioneers
was my book.
It's
and
my book.
Isn't it amazing that in so many ways in my life I have lived that Oh, Pioneers energy?
Yes.
And so growing up, and my first shattering experience in my life was when I went through the ending of my first marriage.
Well, I think there was a really deep shattering
Oh,
before
yes,
then.
there was.
Marge, your father died
Yes,
when you were very young.
We talked about that
And that
yesterday.
is so important because that was a major initiation into the impermanence of the world and into heartbreak and into loss. And at a time in your life when you hadn't yet constructed an identity, it must have been a tremendous shattering.
I was 11 years old.
Right.
And so it was the loss of my greatest love.
Right.
I was Daddy's girl.
Yes.
And I knew it, and he knew it, and everyone else knew it. I would arrange my playhouse on the front porch of our home in Boulder and have all of my dolls and things out there, and I would wait on that front porch for him to drive up and park his Buick.
How beautiful. And you told me once that he used to dance you
Yes.
down the path, and
He
you
would
felt
get-
this exhilaration every time he came, that he would show his love for you so
He would get out of the
passionately.
car, come around the car, and stand at the end of the sidewalk. And I would run down the stairs and jump into his arms, and we would dance. He would dance me all the way up the sidewalk. I mean, it was like being carried across the threshold with my first love.
Wow.
And it was an amazing, beautiful, beautiful relationship. But that amazing, beautiful relationship actually came out of a shattering for my father and my mother.
Wow.
Before me, they had tried very hard to conceive and had become pregnant with twins. And my twin brother and sister died at birth.
Oh.
Gerald and Geraldine. And so when I was conceived, a couple of years later, I was a treasured child from that first moment in the womb, which...
You're a kind of miracle.
Yeah, it's really true. And so I was cherished and treasured, and I'm really aware that that is not the condition that some souls come into.
Oh my God, no. Certainly wasn't my condition. But I believe that gave you the fundamental strength and stability that has enabled you to weather so many losses and shatterings, and to weather them in a way that transformed the losses and shatterings into opportunities to open even deeper to the vastness of reality. It's wonderful that you had that.
Yeah. So when he died when I was 11, I went into my teen years yearning for the beloved.
Yes.
My teenage
You said
perception
something
of
very
that.
important. Let's just stop there. I believe that you experienced a very deep taste of the beloved through your father's unconditional rapturous love of you. And I believe that the beloved who knew that your destiny had to be an increasingly spiritual one took away your father so that the longing that had been satisfied by your father could now be projected onto the infinite. It's only a loss that deep that can turn you to the source of all truth.
Yeah.
And that's something that all the great mystics have always known.
And that led me ultimately to look for that love, and out of that yearning, my first marriage happened when I was 18.
Gosh, you were young.
Very, very young. I was like a child still, as I look back. My son was born when I was 19.
Bud, yes.
Bud. And just such an amazing gift of motherhood. And so I was going through all of the experiences that people have as marker events in their life, building a marriage, building a family, having a child. And I was doing it very young,
Absolutely.
when I was still a bit of a child myself, and not as wise, not as knowing, perhaps.
How could you have been?
There's no way that I could have been.
No.
And yet I'm so grateful that I did it young, because, as you know, my son only lived for 45 years. So I had him for such a brief time in his life, and it feels brief now. It's been 12 years since he passed. And so I've had a great relationship that has been a juxtaposition of immense joy and immense sorrow and immense grief. And then going back to the awareness of the complexity of how love and loss and
How they sculpt us.
yeah.
There's a wonderful image that de Caussade has of God being like a sculptor and we being like a block of stone.
Yes.
And for so long, all we feel are the hacks of the sculptor's axe, the chisel. And we don't know what's going on. And then one day, God allows the mirror to descend in which we see the strange and wonderful and ragged masterpiece that God has created with all these seemingly haphazard blows. It's an amazing image for what life is like, isn't it?
It really is.
Did your first marriage end?
It did. And I look back on that, and I think one of the pieces of that was that I never experienced my adolescence.
Right.
I was contained in the structure of an academy that was rigorously disciplined by the rules of the church, and I didn't know anything different, so that was okay with me. However, I began to recognize that there was more, even though I didn't know what more was.
Right.
And I think many people have that feeling about their lives.
Absolutely.
Even early. And so in the book, I try to bring in all of those paradoxes and the kinds of polarities we see and we experience in our life, even when we don't know.
What happened to you after your first marriage collapsed?
I think we just found out we had different dreams. The flash just came in. One of the moments was when I applied to law school. I had finished my degree at William Jewell College, a Southern Baptist college, interestingly. and had taught for a couple of years and was still feeling that yearning somehow. And I decided to apply to law school. And I applied to 2 different law schools, University of Colorado and University of Missouri, Kansas City. I was accepted in both of them.
Wow.
And this is when women, only the people going accepted into law school, only about 7% of them were women in the 1960s.
Right.
And the University of Missouri in Kansas City offered me a full scholarship because I'd blown the top off of the law school admissions test in writing skills.
Very cool.
Isn't that fascinating? I accepted it and intended to go until my husband and I had several deep conversations, and he said, well, I just don't want to be married to a lawyer.
Oh, God.
Now, the part of me that was imprinted with the Seventh-day Adventist, till death do us part, love, honor, and obey, said, oh. And I didn't go.
Oh, my goodness.
I didn't fight for it. I just surrendered it. And what I know is that it would have been a piece of the story, but it wasn't what the yearning was about. Because what I recognize now, that what I was given was really divine law.
Yes.
And the pillars of the garden that the whole book is about is about the divine law of creation.
Yes.
And, years later,
you can see that.
I can see that.
Right.
And I can still hear the voice of my beloved teacher in that first 6 weeks of seminary. His name was Marvin Anderson.
How did you get to the seminary? Tell us about that.
I skipped over a bunch of story, didn't I?
Yes.
I actually continued and did my master's degree and continued to teach. I taught in the secondary school system. I taught psychology and sociology for gifted students.
Wow.
And taught in an amazing school in Kansas City, Oak Park, North Kansas City.
Right.
Oak Park High School, which was one of the 10 model schools in the country for sort of avant-garde education. And
Gracious,
my principal was just such a mentor and a guide. He celebrated me in every way. So,
like the repeating of your father, really.
Exactly.
You had a man who really saw your gifts and sustained them and celebrated.
Exactly.
That's wonderful.
And then at one point I began to experience this additional yearning, and the yearning, it's the hound of heaven.
Yes.
It's another animal in your life.
Absolutely. It's an animal in the core of your heart. How would you explain yearning? What is yearning for you? You use that word so often and such a key to your whole journey. What is yearning for you?
It guides me into destiny. It guides me into purpose. It fills me with passion. Sometimes it's so overwhelming that I don't even know how to deal with it. And it's hard for even the people in my life sometimes to deal with it.
Yes.
Because they've described it as, you have such intensity.
Yes.
You've seen a bit of that.
I have. It's very difficult to be possessed by a yearning for divine union.
Yes.
Because it's very difficult to understand oneself.
Yes.
And it's very difficult for the people who are in relationship with you to understand that you're possessed by something that in the end will go beyond any form of human relationship.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah.
one of the sadnesses of it, but also one of the liberations
Yeah.
of it. So how
So,
did you want to go into seminary? What happened to you to make you choose seminary? It must have been something really momentous.
well, there was another little piece that was sort of important. I was teaching in the North Kansas City school system, and signed up for a summer course, continuing education credit, which was required of teachers. And the course was about curriculum. And I was taking it just to get the credits. And I can't remember the title of the course even, but what the teacher had us do on the very beginning of the course, everyone in the class was teachers in the public school system. She asked us to, what we taught, and many of us taught history or English or other subjects.
Mm-hmm.
And then she asked us to go back to our classrooms the next day and have our students open up the indexes at the back of their official textbooks
Mm-hmm.
and do an exercise. Count the number of men's name in the index and count the number of women's name in the index. And that was in the history book, and then I taught what they called then common learnings, which included English.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the literature book, count the number of published stories that have been
Mm-hmm.
written by men, count the number of published stories that have been written by women. Even count the number of pictures of men,
Mm-hmm.
and count the number of pictures of women.
Mm-hmm.
No other purpose than just to count. And then ask yourself the question, what does this tell you?
Gosh, yeah.
I was shocked.
You were shattered because you saw the deep misogyny.
I felt like I was perpetrating a crime,
Right.
and I was the perpetrator.
Right.
I was seeding something that was totally, totally wrong on the hearts and the minds of my students.
Right.
And my passion took over. And I asked my teacher, well, where can I get books? And she said, well, there's a publishing house in New York. It's called Feminist Press. Get in touch with them and see if they have anything. Now, she may have known the answer. I didn't. But she led us to experience our answers rather than telling us our
Oh, wonderful.
answers.
Yeah.
So I called, and they put Florence Howe on the line. And I passionately asked her the questions. Well, we only have a few books now. When can I get books? Well, we're just in the process of researching and finding them and finding the writings and putting them into book form. And,
Wow.
and well, and I was going on, and I happened at that time to be very, very actively involved. I was a political science major in my bachelor's degree. And I was involved in political action committees for teachers. And she said to me, she said, you really care about this, don't you? And I said, well, yes. I can't keep doing this to my students. And she said, if you really feel that passionate about it, are you on summer vacation? I said, yes. And she said, why don't you come and volunteer for the summer and help us do the work?
Wonderful.
It was a glorious summer, actually. And they were very, very interested in continuing and decided that they would apply for a Rockefeller Foundation grant
Right.
to continue the work, and wondered if I would head it up because I'd done all of this lobbying with people in power.
And what happened to you that summer that made you really want to go forward and claim your spiritual destiny?
Well, one thing that happened that I can label it now that I couldn't then, the divine feminine was being born in me. And it was not just the gentle,
No,
tender, sweet.
it was the fierce feminine that
It was
realized
the
that the world is
fierce.
plagued with injustice and
It was
discrimination.
Durga.
Yeah, Durga. Yeah, you've got a lot of Durga.
It was Durga.
Yes.
And Durga was being born in me. The difficulty I had, because that experience with the Rockefeller grant manifested, manifestation has come relatively easy for me in my life.
That's a great grace.
It is. And it seems to be kind of a gift of the universe.
Yes.
I don't even know how that happens exactly, but it does. And as I moved into that energy, and part of my job, part of my role was to talk to educators, superintendents of schools, and that kind of.
So Durga went around the schools.
Durga had her assignment.
Yes.
And I would come back and I would be in staff meetings with my colleagues at the feminist.
What happened inside you? Because you say Durga was being born inside you, but there was this longing. And how did this longing take you to want to devote yourself to ministry? This is a very big leap.
First of all, came in the form of recognizing I was doing all of this work for young women who were in those classes. And I was the mother of a son.
Right.
My only child. And because my marriage was in sort of rough waters, it felt like he might be my only child, which he ended up being my only child. Have lots of adopted spiritual children.
Right. That's certainly true.
But I was torn between this Durga energy that was so passionate about the feminine and seemed to be leaving the masculine behind. And I think what it was pulling me was the mystical marriage.
Yes.
That was beyond the divine feminine.
Yes.
And it was the mystical marriage within of the divine masculine and the divine feminine.
Was there an experience that you had that made you go to seminary? Was there something that prompted you?
The ending of my second marriage.
Another
Here
loss
we are.
that led
Another
to
loss,
another growth
shattering
of your identity.
And this time, the first marriage felt more like a choice I participated in. This one did not. It was my husband that decided to pursue a relationship that he was feeling was someone he had met when he took a church in New York. And
so he was a pastor.
He was what?
He was a priest.
He was a minister. And it's interesting, in a sense, a priest also, because he did his training as under one of the few Unity ministers in Unity's history that used to wear a black robe and a white collar.
Wow.
And so he also did.
And when the marriage ended, did you have to reinvent your life and really decide what you were going to do next?
And so I was heartbroken.
Of course.
I thought, my God, my imprint was still there. Until death do us part, even though it hadn't worked with the father of my son. And but it was, the imprint was still there.
Of course, yeah.
And the whole awareness of love and marriage is something very, very sacred. And so during that time, he didn't want me to come to New York. What I realize now he later married the woman that he had fallen in love with, and they had twins, interestingly.
Right.
But what I realize now is that marriages on the human plane have beginnings and endings.
Yes.
And often they're interrelated with soul assignments. And I can see very clearly one of the purposes of the relationship with my son's father was that I would experience motherhood. He would experience being a father. We would have that great, great gift in our lives. And I couldn't, because of my own destiny path, I could not stay in the box.
Yes.
Of that Seventh-day Adventist
Well,
structure.
the problem is that part of one wants desperately to stay in the box, and it has to be shattered, that box,
it
broken,
has to be shattered.
so that you could be released. So
It
after your
has to.
second marriage failed,
And
what happened to you then that made you want to really claim your own spiritual destiny?
I went to Unity Village, and I sat in the prayer chapel. He was a Unity minister.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat in the prayer chapel. You've been there.
I have,
You know that
many
little
times.
tiny
Yes,
prayer
I
chapel.
have. It's a very beautiful place.
And I
It's
sat
center of
there,
unity.
and they had called me and asked me to come out for an appointment. There was a rule at that time, I'm not sure if it still exists, but if your marriage is in trouble and you are a Unity minister, you are required to notify the head office.
Goodness.
Because it impacts churches.
Of course.
And so the person who was my beloved friend, also a Unity minister, talked to him, who was his classmate, and said, "You have got to follow these guidelines. You took vows that you would do it." And so he did, and they called me. Oh my God, I felt so much shame.
Wow.
You know, it's amazing how we go into these dives. And now, I call them shadow crashes.
Yes.
You know?
But it's easy to do, isn't it? Because if somebody believes deeply in love and then it gets shattered again and again, you think you're not lovable. You think that there's something deeply wrong with you.
And so I went into the grief and clear down to shame, and in a, later I would find David Hawkins in his map of consciousness and see how deeply destructive those are of our human spirit. And it was such a gift. But in that process, what I did was simply sit there in that room with tears streaming down my face, and just clenching my fists, and my Seventh-day Adventist imprint of Bible verses came back. And the imprint from my Aunt Lida teaching me the Bible when I was 5 years old, moving those little figures around.
That never goes away, does it?
It never goes away.
Thank
in the
God,
sand tray.
actually. Yes.
Ask and you will receive.
Wow.
And there I am sitting in this shattered experience of heartbreak and my heart being broken. And I clench my fists in front of, on the first row of that room where the Bible's right in front of you. And I said, I ask in the name and through the power of Jesus Christ. Now, Unity doesn't use the words Jesus Christ a whole lot in that kind of Bible teaching because they have
a more cosmic vision of Christ. But the
cosmic.
Adventists love
but they did,
Christ,
and
Jesus.
That's what came back.
Absolutely.
To hold me.
Yes.
And I mean, it was like pleading. And then suddenly it occurred to me that I had this appointment that I was there for. And it was in another building, and I better go or I'd be late. And I walked over to the room, and it was someone my ex-husband and I had gotten acquainted with when he interviewed for a church in Washington State. And so I knew him, and so we kind of had hellos that were delightful, and seeing old friends, and but we both knew why I was there. And as he began to enter that territory and say, well, let's talk about, suddenly the light in the room changed.
Oh my goodness.
The light totally changed. And I heard a voice. I thought it was his voice, but I heard a voice. And the voice said, close your eyes, Marj. And I closed my eyes, and the voice spoke and said, if you could do anything in the world, what would you do? And the tears just streamed down my cheeks then, just streamed. And I said, I would be a minister. I had never had that thought, not once in my rational mind. I had completed my doctoral degree. I thought maybe I would develop an institute of something kind of or another, of human resources or human development, and maybe it would have an overlapping board. I mean, I thought of those kinds of things, and working with my minister husband. But I had never, I never ever of my human mind thought I would be a minister. I had my life planned. And there were those words.
And there was your vow.
And the voice had been deep. And suddenly the light begins to change again.
God.
And I hear the person in an excited voice of a different caliber saying, if you really mean that, the deadlines for application for ministerial school are 3 weeks away. And if you really mean that, go down the hall today to the desk of Gladys Branscombe and ask for an application.
Wow. I would love to take you through the whole of this amazing story. But for the purpose of this conversation, if you could just sketch for us what then happened to bring you to this place where you birthed the book, that would be wonderful. Because I think you've given us the texture of drama and loss and reinvention that have created your life. So could you do that for us? That would be lovely.
Yeah.
So you had this extraordinary experience, and then you became a minister, then you went to Walnut Creek, and what happened there to you?
You know, Walnut Creek was the perfect place for me to go, even though I never applied for it. They invited me to come. Someone had told them about me that was from there, that I'd talked to in the inn at Unity Village. And another juxtaposition of amazing levels of mystical awareness that
unfolded.
That are intertwined with tragedy.
Yes.
Because Carol Ruth Knox was the minister, a very, very successful minister in Walnut Creek, and an incredible mystic. And I had heard about her and wanted to read what she had written, and which wasn't very much, some sort of spiral bound things, and they invited me to come. I had interviewed her and had a recording of her telling me about her 18 years of ministry. She was murdered.
Oh, God.
In January of the year that I was finishing seminary. And in January, she was murdered. And it threw the ministry in Walnut Creek into deep devastation, of course. And so they're working through their process of how do we deal with this, and they called me and invited me to come. Another story of synchronicity.
Yes.
When I was telling someone in a restaurant, completely away, I'm feeling drawn to Walnut Creek. And got home and the call was on the answering machine. And I went, I was brand new. I was a rookie minister. I didn't have years of wisdom. I was...
You're just starting and improvising and finding out who you were and finding out how the whole church worked. Tremendously difficult moment it must have been.
And so I learned so much there. Yeah. The administrative assistant taught me how to actually do church.
Right.
Experiential learning.
Right.
And I had a mystical message, but it was a wild and crazy time. There was so much grief and so much sorrow. And in the midst of that, 250 new members came into the church during the year that I was there. 250, that's almost huge. Unheard of.
They must have loved you.
Well, I don't know. It's hard to know how all of that was dancing. The church was always full. So I didn't realize that a whole segment of the congregation had left.
Gosh.
In their moments of grief. And then at one point in time, Kali started dancing.
After Durga Kali, yes.
Anyway, I ended up only being there a couple of years and then founded a ministry, pioneered a ministry called Church of Light.
Yes.
In Northern California that was for another 2 or 3 years. And then we went to Estes Park, Colorado. Paul, whom I married in Walnut Creek.
I love Paul.
Yeah. Had always wanted to do retreat ministry. And I said, you need to explore that. You really need to explore your heart's yearning. So we went to Colorado. And I was in Colorado when I got a telephone call that said, we just had a church blow up. Not literally.
No, but
a
big change.
Yeah.
Yes.
The minister had walked out and the congregation was, in turmoil. And we need to get someone in there fast. Would you be willing to go? As a temporary minister.
Church. That was this amazing church.
And I came as a temporary minister. And I had first a 3-month contract, which was extended to a 6-month contract. But I kept telling the people the entire time I was here, 19 years.
Here is Tustin.
That I was a temporary minister. I was hired as a temporary minister.
That's what you thought. But in fact, you were here for 19 years.
Yeah,
and
it was an amazing time.
You had a vision of what this church was meant to be. What was that vision? Because you lived it out with such intensity and such generosity, as all of us who came here know.
It didn't come from my cognitive mind.
No.
It came from my going into the field. I had this same yearning. And now the yearning has moved from the divine feminine into the mystical marriage, but I didn't even have the language for that yet. And I'm attending conferences where I can hear spiritual teachers that seem to be speaking the language that
of the soul,
of the soul, and I didn't even know to call it that. But I had the passion in it. I felt it burning in my heart. And that energy of that flame
that wild burning
living flame of love.
Yes.
And it was there so powerfully. I went to a conference in La Jolla called Inner Directions, the second year that they held it. Someone from the community had been there the year previously and said, "Oh, Marj, you've got to go to this." So, and told me about it and told me about the people that he had heard there. And I signed up for it the next year. He never went back.
But you did.
But I did. That was where I met Eckhart Tolle for the very first time. That was where they filmed the film that is about the flowering of consciousness.
Yes.
That Sounds True still distributes. It wasn't that Sounds True was given that by Inner Directions.
Yes.
Because they wanted Eckhart's message to get out to the world.
As it has so amazingly.
And Eckhart had self-published.
Yes, I know.
The book,
Power
The Power of Now.
Now.
And he signed one of those self-published books for me. And I said, "You've got to come to Unity of Tustin."
That's how it began.
That's how it began.
You invited Eckhart Tolle, and from that you got the wild idea to invite all the cutting-edge teachers in succession.
I met Adyashanti there.
Yes.
Adya was only teaching in homes
He
in
must have
small
been little
groups in
Adyashanti
Southern
at that
California. And we were walking from the hotel over to the conference hall at the Art Center one day, and, just hand in hand and just enjoying.
He's an amazing person,
He's
isn't he?
incredible. And I said, "Adya, you've got to come to Unity of Tustin." And of course he's come the second highest number of times after you.
And this grew
and
and
Adya's
grew and
response,
grew, didn't it? And how did you manage to bring the congregation along with you on this wild mystical journey?
How can you can't help it.
Yeah.
When the minister you have every Sunday is absolutely passionately alive with
That's it.
And every time for Adya or for you, either one, but mostly it was you to begin with.
You would choose the person and then teach the books, which is so amazing.
Yeah.
So you'd come into a congregation that
Way
had
of
already
Passion.
been prepared, like Way of Passion.
Way of
When I first
Passion was the
came-
first book, and I taught it for like 7 weeks ahead of time.
Gosh.
I taught it on Sunday mornings. I taught it on Wednesday nights.
Thank
I
you.
was pouring my heart and soul into it.
Thank you.
People were ignited by that energy, and then you stepped into the field.
That's it.
Where it was absolutely alive.
But
And
this
you
is
would
so
pack it.
unusual, Marj, because usually you just brought in and nothing's been prepared really, and you have to heat it all up yourself. And what was so wonderful is that it was already prepared by you with such devotion.
See,
this is something that all of us are so grateful
You
to you
can't
for.
learn it, I don't think, with the
No.
cognitive mind. And there's no models out there for that.
No.
And I didn't even have a model. All I had was the living flame of love in my heart.
But you were learning about the mystical journey and about the mystical systems all this time.
All this time.
Yes.
And so it was in that book, page 157, my childhood home's phone number, where that line is, quote from you, set up educational institutions where mystical consciousness is at the center of everything. And it
you
became
ran
my
with
mission.
it. I realize it is so moving to me when you told me that, because you never know where your books are going,
I
or
have
who's
a
ever
doctoral
going to be
degree in
ignited.
education.
Right.
I know how to develop curriculum.
Yes, you
I
do.
know how to set up educational institutions.
But very few people have devoted that to mystical consciousness, which is
No
what
one
you
that
did
I
for
know
19
of.
years here. I would love to go deep into this, but we must get to this book that came out of all of these complex experiences of loss, out of the death of your father, out of the shattering of your marriages, out of the death of your beloved son, and out of your own passionate search. All of this awareness and knowledge and deep, deep experience has culminated in this book, which you have birthed at 77. And
78.
78. I was
I
being
wrote it when I was
tactful.
77. 77 when I wrote it. 78 when it was
So
published.
this book is structured around the 7 pillars of creation.
Yes.
And why did you do that? And what's so important about these 7 pillars of creation? And how does this structure guide us into the soul's codes? Because this is something you've been working on for 30, 40 years, and now it's all crystallized in this wonderful book. So just give us an overview, if you can, of why these
Well, it goes
7
all the
pillars.
way back to seminary, the first 6 weeks, where I started to jump into, and you said, wait a minute, there's some things that came before that. Marvin Anderson, a radical revolutionary.
Mm-hmm.
He was actually fired before I graduated because he was too radical.
We know that story, yes.
And he was teaching metaphysics, and I've been there for six weeks, and he's amazing. He had that charismatic power of the mystery, and he had that passion, but he was also a bit of what I call a unity fundamentalist.
Yes.
He absolutely loved the teachings of Charles and Myrtle Fillmore.
Well, they're wonderful teachings.
And they were mystics.
Oh, very great mystics.
Absolutely mystics. And so he was very aligned with both. And I'll never forget that day. He said, we're going to talk about the first chapter of Genesis. It's about involution. And what I know now, it's the descent of the Holy Spirit.
Right.
It's about involution.
How the light breaks,
How does the
comes
light
down
come
and breaks
down?
through and creates in stages.
Yeah.
Yes.
He said the first chapter of the Bible is about involution.
Yes.
And then the whole rest of the Bible is
the
about
unfolding
evolution.
of it. Yes.
Involution first in one chapter.
Yes.
That's the garden
Yes.
that you and I have walked through
Yes.
so many times.
This beautiful garden that you created here.
And Marvin said that day, this is the key to everything.
Gosh.
And we don't understand it yet.
Good heavens.
He didn't try to convince us that he knew what it was.
Isn't that wonderful?
It was mystery.
Yes.
And he brought it to us as mystery.
And he electrified you with that mystery.
And I was absolutely spellbound. I was enraptured. And then he began to talk about it. And here's another one of those moments. My whole body started tingling.
Yes.
I didn't have the language then that I do now. What I recognize now is what in Eastern traditions was a Kundalini experience.
Yes.
My whole body tingling. And yet, there it was. I knew.
And you were given a fundamental key
The
that you
key
would
to
work
everything.
with for all these years in terms of your own deepest experience, which is why the book is so powerful.
I knew it would be the work of my life.
Wow.
And there's a chapter in the book called The Key to Everything.
Yes.
And so it's amazing how the book spans my life, but it's not my life story.
No.
There's in each chapter, there are 40 short chapters. One you could read in a day, a time of meditation. Many people who have the book have told me this is what they're doing. Reading one short chapter and then scribing what comes. And which is what I've...
Well, I love the way you've written the book because you've dived deep into your deepest experience. You've shared some of the great secrets of your mystical journey. You've gone into the depths of what you want to share, but you've also inviting constantly the reader in to meditate on what you're sharing, and then you have these wonderful blank pages in which you're really inviting the reader to deeply take in the stage that you're describing and meditate on it.
Yes.
This is a wonderful interactive feminine model. Durga and Kali have got together with Saraswati to provide a
Exactly.
really rich journey for the reader through these 7 pillars. What are these 7 pillars?
So the first pillar is, and most people, I didn't even realize this until I started teaching it at these deepest levels. I thought let there be light was the beginning.
Oh no,
And it's not.
it's the darkness
There
before
was
the light.
darkness and void,
And void.
on the face of the waters. Void.
Out of the emptiness.
Unknowing, the emptiness.
Yes.
And the emptiness is the platform for every shift into
Absolutely.
the vastness that is next.
Yes.
And I said vastness that is next because this happens over and
Oh, it's
over
an
and over.
endless new beginning.
And
on
the book
every
is
level.
about that.
Yes.
And so it goes through all of the pillars. So let there be light comes after the darkness and the void. That's all.
The
first
eruption of the
pillar.
light out of the darkness. The
Yes.
darkness gives birth to the light, which then creates all the different worlds.
And then in the garden, there's the stepping stones. You get a brief glimpse. I compare it to going into a puzzle store.
Yes.
And you see the boxes of the puzzles, but you don't know what the puzzles
Yes.
are going to.
What are the other stages? It's important that
The
that we
second
give
stage
those
is
stages.
about faith. When Charles Fillmore chose the word to describe it, it's the waters separated from the waters,
Yes.
the superconscious from the unconscious.
Yes.
I call it radical trust.
Yes.
But not in your human mind conceptions.
No, in the depths
not
of the
in-
heart.
Yeah.
Yes.
And in that radical trust, you access the gifts of genius that your soul brought in.
Yes.
It's not about your human IQ.
Oh
It's
my
not
God,
the genius
no.
we're talking
If it was about the human IQ, it would be so limited. You get access to the unlimited, which then unveils the central imprint of your life and activates the great skills and passions that can help you realize
Yes.
that imprint.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the third pillar is divine imagination.
Yes.
And that is really opening to listening to the whispers,
Yes.
allowing that inspiration inspire.
Yes.
Almost like the spires of the great cathedrals in Europe, like you and I have been to
Yes.
Shards.
Yes.
Those spiraling
Yes.
spires and the elegance and the majesty,
Yes.
but it's inverted. It's coming in now.
Yes.
And the jade table in the garden is
Yes.
sitting at the drawing board of divine mind, and you're sitting there listening to the whispers, and you're
Yes.
scribing what divine mind is giving you, not what your human mind is planning or trying to figure
Your human
out.
mind becomes an empty receptacle for these strange whispers of truth
Yes.
that will come to you
Yes.
if you can fall silent and truly trust them.
And they come in dreams.
Yes.
They come in visions.
Yes.
And so the book has a lot of chapters where I wake up with the dream. I'm given in a dream when I'm in this almost lucid dreaming state.
Yes.
What the chapter that I will write about, I wrote every morning for a
I
year.
love that about the book, that you trust so deeply, that you follow that. And it's really wonderful because it guides us into how we can follow these whispers and where we can find these
And
whispers.
the dream gives you the symbols.
Yes.
And sometimes the music, sometimes I hear music, the music of the spheres, but sometimes it comes to me in love songs.
Yes.
And then I have to listen to it as it gives me the words as I scribe them.
Yes.
So it's really an instruction and a practice that I've seldom seen
Yes.
described in anything.
It's really an
a
opening of the
book.
mystical creative process.
Yeah, yeah.
What's the fourth?
The fourth
pillar?
is where the invisible, the first three stages are all in the invisible.
Right.
The invisible begins to come
become
into
manifest,
the visible,
yes.
and it becomes manifest. So here you have divine will and divine understanding, and all of these are based on a basic unity framework, the 12 powers.
Yes.
And
Charles Fillmore's. Yes.
Charles Fillmore.
That's a magnificent document.
Cora Fillmore, who was Charles Fillmore's second wife after Myrtle's death, wrote a book called Christ Enthroned in Man. And so this is all about this involution.
Yes.
And it's all amazing mystical unity.
Yes.
So
this is about, the last stage is about the incarnation, how this gets
yes,
manifest.
how it gets into manifest form.
Yes.
And actually the planet right now, no, not the planet, the United States is in this third stage. In some of the developmental stage models that you are familiar with, they're woven in, because that's the only place that I've really found some real solid scientific research, and that relates to the stages that are advanced stages.
Yes.
It's the achiever stage. This is where people are really interested in power and
money
wealth
and success. Yes.
And it's all about me. It's me
there.
first.
Yes.
Or America first.
Oh, it's such a dreary, tragic choice, isn't it? If you stay there, it's a necessary stage. But you've got to get out of it. Yes.
In the pillars, it's the fourth pillar.
Yes.
And this is America has changed the world.
Yes.
So it's been an immense gift to the world.
Wow.
And now we're being invited, which is always the invitation of the mystical.
Yes.
And the mystical is not just for mystics.
No, everyone is a closet mystic.
All of these are alive in everyone.
Of course, it's like the DNA of us. Yeah.
Yeah, every single stage has all of the pillars in it, but the light is pulsating through one of the colors of the rainbow.
That is corresponding to your stage in your development.
Exactly.
What's the fifth stage?
The fifth stage is once you have all of that amazing success and achievement and power and glory at the human level, then you go into the light getting shined on the darkness.
Yes.
And you go to the fifth stage, which has two sides. Again, in the garden, it's St. Francis Garden and the koi pond.
Yes.
That's based on the fifth day of creation. St. Francis Garden is about the birds of the sky that fly in the amazing awareness of the universe. And the other side, the koi pond, was the way that we found to symbolize what some translations of the Bible call the great sea monsters.
Yes.
Guess where we are right now in Washington, D.C.?
We've got all the great sea monsters showing their heads above the water, yes.
And we're in the midst of what some people have called a constitutional crisis.
It's much more than that. It's a crisis on every level, isn't it?
And we're in that fifth stage at the level of world leadership.
Yes.
And world leadership could change as a result of that.
We hope.
Or the planet could die as a result of that.
Absolutely. That's where we are.
This creation story is about everything.
Yes.
2,000 years old, and it has the story of what's happening now. And so the fifth stage has the two parts. The choose you this day. This is Joshua in the Old Testament. Choose ye this day whom you will serve. And as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
Wow.
It's not a demand.
But if you do make that choice,
it's an invitation to choose.
And then when you make that choice, all sorts of things are activated by the divine light within you to help you realize that choice. But you have to pay the price for that choice.
Absolutely.
You have to accept that choice requires a death. Yes.
It's called karma.
Yes, it's called karma. But it's also called accepting the different ordeals that kill your false self, that enable your true self finally to emerge.
I can see those choices all through all of the stages of my life.
Absolutely.
That were conscious and unconscious. And I had to go through them.
Yes.
It's part of growing up.
Yes.
Which is...
You need a lot of manure to grow a real rose, yes.
It's in this interesting relationship with waking up and growing up, and the dance between the two of them. And so then we're going toward the sixth stage, which you and I are going to lead an amazing experience of tonight together with this community, this beloved community right here. And
how would you describe the sixth stage?
The sixth day is where the image on the front cover of my book is in the garden. It is that stained glass image,
which was actually done
which
by
was
your
created
son,
by
your
my
beloved
son.
Yes.
He created it about 6 months before he
And it's the
passed
stage
through
of the
veils.
unity of the great masculine and the great feminine, the divine masculine.
The divine masculine,
within
the
each one
divine
of us.
feminine, within each one of us.
The transcendent and the immanent, the body and the soul, the heart and the mind, this unity of the whole being in the divine. It's actually the beginning of divinization, of deification.
Absolutely right.
Yes.
Just it's so powerful, so beautiful.
It's the deepest mystery we know.
And this mystical marriage, this mystical union, was what you were teaching in Petaluma 2 years ago when I was there and for the 5-day retreat and went into the deep dives. And at the end of the retreat, you said...
Write your book, I said.
Write your book.
Absolutely. And you made a vow to me that you'd write it in a year, and you have written it in a year.
And it was a vow to you, but the vow to you was a vow to the beloved.
Right. I was just the beloved's ambassador.
You were an embodied form that, first of all, cajoled me, almost, insisted in your passion and all of the ways that you have of telling people to get with it.
It's one of my deepest joys to say to a woman I love and respect, please write your book, because we need the voices of the feminine so much at this moment. And so many great women are very shy of really revealing the depths for obvious reasons, because the feminine has been so degraded.
I talk about this in the book. I hit the wall in writing the book over and over and over. And the way that I hit the wall was I would realize I was being so transparent. I say things in that book that I never, ever said on the platform.
That's one of the things I really begged you to be. And that's one of the things the feminine is so much better at being usually than the masculine. Being transparent, being naked about what the process actually involves. All the failures, the losses, the craziness, everything.
Absolutely.
The cooking
the thing
soul.
That isn't in the book is shame and blame. There's no blame. This is glimpses of my story of growing up and waking up.
Well, at the level that you've come to, shame and blame is irrelevant. All of this was meant to happen.
Of course.
Everybody in one's life is an ambassador of God doing various tasks, some rather dreadful, but necessary to wake one up to reality.
This is a book that is a manual for the soul.
Absolutely.
And it's a manual about seeing through the eyes of love. This is not about journaling.
No.
This is not about an autobiography.
No.
In fact, sometimes the glimpse that's in a chapter will only be a paragraph or two long. The glimpses of my life are short. If people want to go into the deep dives, they do it by applying the questions.
Exactly.
At the
what
end.
you're doing is offering the nuggets of hard-won wisdom to people to give them an invitation to take that love's eye view of their own lives so they can appreciate these stages and have those stages imprinted in them so that as they unfold, they'll have a map.
Yes.
What is the seventh stage?
Well, there's a little path that goes off to the side after the sixth site, and the seventh before
This is the site that you created in the garden. Yes.
This is the little path that goes to the cave of the heart.
Yes.
Which is also the cave of Brahman.
Yes.
In Eastern teachings.
The ultimate revelation of non-dual reality, non-dual identity.
Yes.
The revelation of I am that, finally freed from the identifications, the personality, the dogmas, the concepts, the vast open sky of divine love awareness. Yes.
And this is also where I have experienced the awareness of multiple realities existing simultaneously.
Yes.
There's one or two places in the book where I talk about hearing the conversations that I still continue to have, like telephone calls through the veils.
Yes.
And I have just a couple of brief examples.
You can't enter into non-duality without realizing that all worlds are present, all realms are present right now. And if it's your particular gift, you may find yourself being open to that reality, meeting angels, meeting sages who have so-called died but are still alive, and also experiencing in your own life messages from people you have loved, who have passed over, that are unmistakably real.
Yeah, and you
because everything is in.
You recognize it's them, as my son told me when he taught me how to listen. And I talk about this in the book.
After he's
You'll
died.
know it's me, Mom. It'll seem like thoughts coming into your mind, he said. But you'll know it's me by the way I say it.
I've just had an experience of this myself, because a very, very great friend of mine died, and she actually gave me this watch, and I didn't know where it was, and I had another watch that I put in a bag. The day after her death, I opened the bag, and this watch was in it, and there was no way that I'd put that watch in that bag, and I laughed. It was exactly the kind of mischief that Nancy would get up to, and I've been wearing it ever since. These things happen.
I know.
And knowing that they happen is such an unbelievable liberation, because you realize there's an intelligence guiding this which is deathless and ultimately will take us all, if we work, to liberation. That's the source of enormous hope, isn't it? Even in the middle of all of this craziness.
And then we go to the seventh site, which is resting in the realization. On the seventh day, God rested, is the way it is literally interpreted in the Bible.
It's actually resting in the great peace of oneness.
Yeah, the great peace of oneness, and this is where you begin to realize, you are me, I am you, and all of that.
And when you begin to realize something of the truth of what Juliana of Norwich said, when all manner of things shall be well, because at this level, all things are always well.
Yes.
There is no possibility of disturbance. It's the bottom of the sea, which is the calmest and profoundest and deepest rest.
So in the garden, in the panel of realization, we have all of the major spiritual paths from around the world, symbols of them. There's pictures of each of the garden sites in the book.
Yes.
And then there's one panel that is an open circle that represents all unnamed spiritual paths, past, present, and future. And so the book then only has 7 codes. In the garden, there's actually 8 sites. So we combine site 7 and site 8 into the 7th code. And the part that is the 8th site in the garden is the one that is Jesus,
dedicated to returning one's gifts to the world. Yes.
Jesus saying, you are the light of the world.
Yes. Go back and shine that light.
Or the last Zen ox herding picture.
The guy coming back into the marketplace
with
after the great revelation.
Bestowing hands. So, and the Kuan Yin stands, the very vast big Kuan Yin stands as we leave the garden, taking the gifts back out into the world.
It's been wonderful sharing just a little bit of this journey that you've been on with you. And in the last part of our conversation, I'd love you to turn to the camera and just to address everybody out there and to really say from your heart why you believe that this book that's taken you your whole life to write and is now here, why you believe that this book can be of real help to people in our tragic and explosive situation.
And so I look into your eyes, beloved one, precious, precious soul. And I know some of you have experienced the yearning that I experienced. I know some of you have experienced the losses that I have experienced. And I know some of you have experienced the amazing joys and gifts and awareness that I have humbly received. And somehow, those of you who will say, I think I need to get that book, you will be invited into one of the greatest mysteries that has ever existed. You embody that mystery. And if you've ever felt moments of confusion or chaos or like, oh my God, I don't know how to go on, this is your answer. Is it because of the words I've written? Not really. Because they are only pointers for the words that you will write. And you won't write them from your cognitive mind. Your cognitive mind does not know how to enter all of the levels of the vastness. But your heart knows. There's something in you that is so vast and so beautiful and that is destined to become a teacher, a facilitator, a leader, one who plants the seeds of this light. And you will do it in whatever profession or job or setting you are in. One of the angels in my life is my gardener, and I gave him a copy of the book today. And he knows. He tells me he comes to cut my lawn because it's his way of serving God. One of the people who has read the book talks about how it's taken her into deep dives that she can now share with her many, many clients on the World Wide Web. She's a well-known coach, and if I said her name, you would recognize it. It comes from the medical doctor who's been part of our community and took it into the medical organization that he was a part of in senior leadership in all of Southern California, and planted the seeds of consciousness through teaching the awareness of the spiral and of integral and of the principles of how we grow up and wake up in our lives and in our work settings and in our homes and in our families and in our churches. The reason I've been so totally naked in this book is because I've been in all of those settings. From my beautiful relationship with fundamentalist Christianity to the passionate relationship that I now have with mystical consciousness. And I know all of them have been there always, already. I invite you to come into the scribing of your love story. I call it Write Your Soul. When you do that, if you do that, you will read the greatest book that you've ever read, and it is the story of your own soul's journey. This book points the way to that, if you're willing.
Thank you so much, Marj. How lovely to have been on this journey with you. God bless you, and God bless this beautiful book. May it reach all the people that it can truly help.
The candle that you gave me the first time you came here, a beautiful heart candle that I lit for the first time when you came back to celebrate the launch of my book.
May it always be lit. Bless you, darling. Thank you.
I love you.
I love you very much.
Heart to heart.
Heart to heart.
Soul to soul.